Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command, and it's a chilly holiday in Los Angeles, and Happy New Year's, everyone! We're here today to talk about Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Is it the greatest movie ever made? Now, first of all, for those who don't know who I am, I'm a writer, producer, director. I've done hundreds of hours of network television shows. I have credits on Star Trek: Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Sliders, Babylon 5, Smurfs, He-Man, Real Ghostbusters, tons and tons and tons of shows. And I also wrote the Twilight Zone Companion and other books, Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities and the Magic Time novels. And I've just had about a 40-year career writing books and TV shows and movies. And now, of course, I'm doing Space Command. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about what everyone's been talking about. And let me preface this by saying that I probably will be talking about some of the plot elements of The Force Awakens. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to be a little careful about what I'm going to say. But if you have seen it, I think we're going to get into some very interesting material. So first of all, let me talk about what Star Wars means to me. I was of the generation where Star Trek was the big deal. Essentially, when Star Trek debuted when I was a kid, and it was basically what I'd been waiting for my whole life and didn't know I'd been waiting for. The moment I saw Star Trek, the first episode was The Man Trap, written by George Clayton Johnson, a dear friend of mine who just passed away. We'll be doing another Mr. Sci-Fi video about him very shortly. But when Star Trek aired, that was that. I was hooked. And it really has shaped my life ever since then, in terms of, from then on, I basically wanted to create and run my own science fiction show, and that's essentially what I'm doing with Space Command. So I was basically about 10 years too early for Star Wars to have the enormous impact on me it would have had it come out when I was 10. But when Star Wars came out, it still was a movie that I liked very, very much. And the fascinating thing about Star Wars was that the novel came out first. It came out, I think, a few months before the movie came out. And there was a radio show called Hour 25 that dealt with science fiction, and it was on once a week on KPFK. Mike Hodell and Mitchell Harding were the hosts. And they read the novel. And I started talking about the novel before the movie came out. And they said, if the movie shows any of the stuff that this book is talking about, if it shows what's being described in the book, it's going to be an amazing movie. And it came out, and it did exactly that. One of the things that was so spectacular, so amazing about Star Wars that no one really ever talks about is the fact that those of us who grew up reading science fiction, these were the pictures we had in our head that had never been in a movie before. The land speeder, the cantina scene, these are the things, I mean, everyone talks about Luke Skywalker and the plot and all of that, and the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell, and those things are significant and meaningful. But it was the details, it was the wealth of what we were being shown, the universe we were being taken into, that was just spectacular, just amazing. I mean, the fact that cantina scene just has so many aliens. Prior to that, science fiction films might show an alien or, a monster or whatever. It would show, like Vulcans or, guys with pointy ears. But that just threw us in the deep end of the science fiction that we'd been reading forever. The adventure science fiction, Heinlein, Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, but also the people who were just writing space opera and having such a great time with it. And there it was. And so it was very, very exciting. Now, I think the reason that the people who are somewhat younger than me, the people who are now in their 40s, where Star Wars is such a huge and meaningful thing, I think there's a reason for that. My friend Mel Gilden said the golden age of science fiction is 13. And I think that's absolutely true. I think 13 and younger is when science fiction can really get under your skin, and the things you encounter at that point, if you're a devotee of science fiction, those are the things that are going to last you for your whole life. Those are going to be the things that you love and that really shape you and that really just kind of take over your world, where you buy all the toys, you buy all the figures, you buy the posters, you buy the T-shirts, all of that. So for me, I was just, that was a little late for me, but still, I started watching Star Wars. I watched all the sequels. Now there is something relating to one of the first Star Wars sequels that is germane to JJ's movie, and I'll share that with you, which is my friend Michael Reeves, who's an Emmy-winning science fiction writer and written a lot of TV and novels, and including Star Wars novels, interestingly enough. Years ago, he was being given a tour of Skywalker Ranch, when I think just around when they had released Return of the Jedi, the third film, and Michael's being escorted by a Lucas representative. And when they mentioned the third movie, Michael, who was very sarcastic, said, and a bit of a wit, said, "Oh yeah, Return of the first movie," and they were not amused at all. Well, I think JJ's film could be characterized in that way. Now, first of all, let me preface this by saying that I think JJ has done a spectacular job. I think it's an amazing film. I think it does a lot of things right. I don't think JJ is a great innovator, but I think he's a great interpreter. I think he can look. He did this with Star Trek. Despite what a lot of people say, a lot of Star Trek fans are not pleased with JJ's Star Trek, but it still made a ton of money, and it's going on a third film now, and there's now going to be a TV show, which we'll talk about in a coming Mr. Sci-Fi video. But JJ did a lot of things right. He's able to look at a franchise, whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars, and say, what works about this? What worked? What made people love this? Why is it exciting? He's able to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff and say, okay, this is what worked, and these are the landmines that we can avoid stepping on. And so he's not going to be doing something hugely innovative, but he is going to be doing something that really, really brings you the goods, that really delivers. And that's, I think, what he's done with The Force Awakens. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my history with J.J. Abrams. So, as I mentioned earlier, I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion. So, some years ago, the Museum of Radio and Television, the Paley Center in Los Angeles, did an evening devoted to the Twilight Zone, and it was 15 people who'd worked on the Twilight Zone, writers, directors, producers, actors, and me, up on stage. And it was very funny because they were all elderly at that point, and whenever a question was asked, they wouldn't remember, but I would. And so it got to a point where there'd be a question asked, and I was sitting on the far side of the stage, and 15 heads would turn to me for the answer. And so it got to a point where when one question was asked of Richard Matheson where I knew the answer, I pretended not to, so that it wouldn't look like I was doing a monologue up on stage with 15 of my heroes from the Twilight Zone. And there were several thousand people in the audience. It was it was really a wonderful evening, and very memorable. And I'm sure there's a record of it. I think they videotaped it. And if you ever want to see it, you can go to the Paley Center either in New York or in LA, and they probably have a record of that evening that you can watch. But at the end of the evening, as all these multitudes were filing out, one person came from deep in the audience and walked up to the edge of the stage and said, "Oh, Mr. Zicree, I'm a big fan of your work. I love the Twilight Zone Companion, and I'd love to take you out to lunch sometime. My name is J.J. Abrams." And that's how I met J.J. So at that time, so we had lunch and got to know each other and really liked each other. And at that point, J.J. was doing Felicity. And he actually, in fact, ended up doing a Felicity episode that was in black and white and was an homage to the Twilight Zone. He hired Lamont Johnson, one of the Twilight Zone directors, to direct it, and I was in the mix on all of that stuff. And so we kept in touch, and over the years we'd get together periodically, every now and then, as he continued his meteoric and splendid rise. In fact, it was very funny because when he was talking about Alias, he mentioned to me that with Alias, the whole beginning of that was that on Felicity, they were trying to come up with stories about this girl, this student, and they said, gosh, it would be so helpful in terms of coming up with stories if she sort of had a secret identity or something like a spy. It'd be so much easier to just come up with stories every week. And so Alias emerges. And then years later, when JJ announced he was going to do the Star Trek movie, this was just when I was about to shoot World Enough in Time, the Star Trek New Voyages episode that I did with George Takei that got nominated for the Hugo and Nebula. And it was done without a studio or a network. And if you want to see it, you can just go to marczicree.com and you can click through and watch the entire episode, which I'm very, very proud of. It's an hour long and it's quite wonderful. It stars Christina Moses along with George Takei. Christina is starring in the new CW series Containment, and she'll be starring in Space Command as well down the road on the fourth film. But JJ had announced he was going to do Star Trek, the motion picture, the new movie, and so I had lunch with him to just make sure that it was okay that we do our George Takei episode, that he wouldn't hear about it, not knowing it was me tell CBS or Paramount to pull the plug. So I thought it was really important to clear it with him, and he said, "Oh, that's fine." He had no problem with it, of course. And he really liked it when he saw it, and he put Christina Moses on a talent deal, which I'd been urging him to do, and he agreed that she was a spectacular actress, which she, of course, is. But so at our lunch talking about Star Trek, JJ mentioned that he wasn't a big Star Trek fan, that he was, he was intent on doing a terrific job in serving the fans and creating something really that would work. But Star Wars really was where his heart lay. That was really the thing for him. So I knew, exactly what his issues were. And when it was announced that he was taking on Star Wars, that he was going to do the new Star Wars movie, I knew that this was going to mean an enormous amount to him, and that he was really determined not to screw it up, really determined to pull it off, and he has. And so I wanted to kind of walk through it a little bit and talk about some of that process and some of what I think he's done right, and what's very, very exciting. And particularly the great part is, it's very rare that when you undertake a project that you have an example before you that's already been done that works terrifically well, or several examples, and then you have an example that doesn't work well at all. Now, the one thing that people seem to not notice about the second three Star Wars films is that despite their failings as stories, and despite their failings in terms of acting and dialogue and performance, and by the way, there's some great performances, some great actors in the second three Star Wars films. I think Ewan McGregor is a terrific actor, and obviously Liam Neeson is a terrific actor. So there are some very, very, very solid pros in there. But what's not noticed is that despite the failings, the dramatic, the artistic failings of those three movies, they made a shitload of money. They were huge blockbusters. Those three films, any filmmaker would have been thrilled to have those grosses, to have those box office returns, and to spin off all of those toys. So whereas Lucas didn't succeed as an artist on those three films, he succeeded enormously as an entrepreneur maintaining a franchise. And also, that, and I think that the key point in this is that he understood the third Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi, is a disappointment, of course. But he said it's a kids' film. It's a kids' film, and the moment you understand that, and understand that that's what he's doing, you understand those second three films. Because what he's doing is he's not trying to do films that will appeal to everyone. He's not trying to do adult films at all. He's trying to do films that will appeal to children, because children are the ones who are going to be buying the toys. They're going to be buying the products. And so he's basically serving the audience that he perceives Star Wars as being for. And one can disagree with that, and it certainly fails the audience, the adult audience who grew up on the original three films. But that's what that's about. And so the second three films were hugely successful. There are a number of kids who grew up with those three films who prefer them to the first three that were made. So, and also, by the way, there's a genre of film that no one has identified that I've noticed, and I want to codify it here because I think it's important. It's a genre of film that's absolutely spectacular if you just ignore the characters talking in the foreground. So watch those three films and you'll see what I'm talking about, because they provide an enormous amount of detail, an enormous amount of riches. They're spectacular in many, many ways visually, and yet they fail in terms of what the characters are saying. Turn off the sound; they're a lot better. And but what JJ did when he was studying all of this, obviously, is he said, okay, what's good about the first three films and what doesn't work in the second three films? Clearly, the second three films, it was all CG, and it looked CG, and it seemed fake, and you didn't buy into what was happening because it was CG. Now, by the way, kids do. I've often said that kids have no taste. And I don't say that in a negative way, because I was a kid and there are things that I love that if an objective adult saw them, they would say, well, this is crap, but I love them and they were wonderful. And so children watch films and they don't say, oh, this is CG versus this is a practical effect. They don't say, oh, well, that dialogue is stilted generally. Maybe some incredibly discerning kids do, but most kids just say, wow, this is really fun, this is really cool, this is really exciting. And that's fine. That's fine, because fortunately you're not thrown in movie jail if you like a crappy movie. You just get to watch a movie and love it. And we all have our secret pleasures in terms of films. But what JJ clearly saw is he said, okay, the characters aren't as strong, the dialogue isn't as strong, let's fix this. And what he did was he got Lawrence Kasdan, of course, great choice, and he went back to the old films, the old characters, the ones that he grew up loving, and he said, okay, let's bring them back. and then let's basically create the first film all over again. So it's a character in the desert who's longing for a life of adventure, who gets a droid, who comes across a droid that has secret plans, delivers the plans to the rebels. The rebels blow up a planet-sized weapon that destroys planets. It's the same movie. It's the exact same movie. But that said, he went back to practicals, physical objects, models, full-size spaceships, all of that stuff. And he said, okay, but what can we do that is different? He did ask that question. He said, well, we've never seen a stormtrooper as a hero. We've never gotten to know that character where we take off the mask and see who's there. Because he said, oh, well, let's watch the first Star Wars movie. Well, those aren't robots, those stormtroopers. They're people. But you don't get to see who they are. You don't get to understand what their heads are or what their lives are. So that's new and that's fresh and that works. Additionally, he said, let's have it be a female lead. Now, coming off Felicity, coming off Alias, that makes a lot of sense. And yet she's wonderful. The character of Rey is absolutely terrific and carries the film. And also, and this is an interesting thing to notice, watching these Star Wars films, sometimes you get the idea that they can't really deliver anything other than another Death Star. They've done it 3 times so far. And though, of course, Starkiller, that was originally going to be Luke Skywalker's last name, and that's a little nod to that because it's the Starkiller. Okay, great. But it's very perfunctory. If you notice, in this third film, when they destroy it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we'll fly in there, we'll destroy it, we'll blow it up. It's and unfortunately, Oscar Isaac's character gets a little short shrift in that. He's a wonderful actor. Anyone who's seen Ex Machina or the Coen Brothers movie that he starred in, or A Year of Violence, he's got enormous range. He's a spectacular performer. So I hope we'll get to see more of him. I hope they'll give him more to do. And then, of course, they have Darth Vader too, Han and Leia's son, and again, I wasn't that fond of that actor, Adam Driver. He wouldn't have been my first choice, but again, it's an interesting storyline. I think it's a bold choice to kill off Han Solo. It echoes Alec Guinness's death in the first film. I think the movie really delivers. The movie really is fun, and of course, everyone was speculating why we're not seeing Mark Hamill in the poster, and those who've seen the film know why, and that's a great arrow to the second film, and we'll all, and Mark Hamill looks absolutely terrific, and I think he's going to deliver hugely in the next film. So that's some of it. That's some of what's going on with Star Wars: The Force Awakens. I think it really has now, and also the other thing that's not talked about, and I think it is meaningful and not to be forgotten, and this again I think is where we can say to JJ, well done, well done. It's very difficult when a studio says, this is our franchise, we're going to be investing billions in marketing, we're going to build new lands in Disneyland and Disney World, this is all resting on your shoulders, because if the movie tanks, if the movie sucks, that's not going to generate, that's not going to sustain, that's not going to work. In terms of rebooting the franchise, it could, all of those toys, all of that stuff could have ended up on the bargain bin, and not worked. We've all seen huge science fiction movies that failed, and have that on your shoulders, and still try to put that aside and say, I've got to deliver a story here. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to have characters we care about. It's got to be about something, and not just and try and turn off all of that noise about products and about marketing and about all the ancillary stuff that really is the tail wagging the dog. That takes a strong personality. That takes someone who can kind of compartmentalize. And JJ again, I think, did that, and kudos to him for that. So that's sort of where it all stands right now. I'm glad that Star Wars came out and is a hit. I think it deserves the success that it's enjoying, and I think J.J. Abrams was absolutely the right person to do this. I think there are many other choices that would have been wrong. I'm very interested to see how Episode 8 goes, because I liked Looper. Rian Johnson is a very good director. He's got a very different sense of his whole aesthetic is different from JJ, and so I think perhaps a darker sensibility maybe he'll bring to the equation what was brought to The Empire Strikes Back, that other darker tone that so many people love and that delivered such a great film. So, and then of course there's going to be Rogue One coming out next year about the freebooters, the rebels who stole the Death Star plans. We'll see about that. I'm not so sure about that one. And then there's the young Han Solo film that's going to be coming down the pike. And in that regard, I wanted to mention a film that came out this past year called The Age of Adeline. Not a great film, but Harrison Ford is in it. He's terrific in it. It's about an immortal girl, and Harrison Ford plays an elderly man who was once her lover. And there's an actor they cast as the young Harrison Ford, and he's terrific, and he'd be great as a young Han Solo. So I hope they hire him and put him in the movie. So that's some of my thoughts on The Force Awakens. It's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, Marc Zicree of Space Command. We'll be with you next time. We're going to have more videos. We'll do one about George Clayton Johnson, my dear friend who we lost on Christmas Day, who was such a brilliant writer for Twilight Zone and Star Trek and Logan's Run. And also a video about Axanar and CBS and Paramount suing them, and what that's going to mean for fan films and other interesting endeavors that the studios may not want to have happen. So we'll talk to you again soon. Have a great holiday, and I think I'm going to go see Star Wars: The Force Awakens again. Take care. Bye-bye.